Good morning. This is the review that I'm posting for the No Red Ink assignment from yesterday, and this is what you want to watch in order to prepare for tomorrow's quiz. I'm just going to kind of go through the lessons and some of the sample questions. So if feel free to skip around a little bit if you feel like you get most of the sections, but there's one you don't get, or one that you're not sure about. Feel free to jump around a little bit, but I'm sure it's beneficial for you just to kind of go through it one more time. Like I said before, the quiz will be on No Red Ink for the time that your class meets, so on Friday. So it's important that you check your schedule, and the questions will be scrambled. So even if it seems kind of easy right now because you're doing it by categories, you have to imagine that for the quiz, everything's mixed. So it won't be as formulaic as it is when you're in a particular category. So just to run through, I think most people are probably clear on this first section about simple, progressive, and perfect tenses. But the lesson here just kind of shows you action verbs, whether it's in the simple tense, right? Or as it gets into the progressive tense, which is with a to be verb, is, are, was, were, or in a perfect tense, which is when you have a to have verb and the participle form, right? Such as will have traveled. It's not really making you have to identify these verbs, whether they're simple, progressive, and perfect. It's just asking you to identify the verb in the sentence. So as far as looking at some practice examples here, where you have a simple verb, it's just the one word, right? So that's easy. Then you will see ones like this, right? Will be, and so will be missing, sorry. So that's going to now get into the progressive. Then you have keeps back to the simple, right? So the only thing you're really being required to do here is to identify or highlight, and identify and then highlight any of the words that make up the verbs. So I think this is pretty easy. I think most of you guys probably will not have issues with this. If you are, just look at each sentence independently. And identify all the words that would be have to go with that action in the sentence. So for instance, finished, you have to include will have finished, since those are linked into the concept of the action verb in that case. All right. So going back to then, or going on to then the next lesson, is this a verb or isn't this a verb? Again, pretty basic here. The idea is the different ways in which verbs can be used in a sentence. If it's a verbal, then it's not being used as a verb in the sentence. So for the example here, we have lives as a verb. George lives in a house made of cheese. But if you were to use a participle form while digging in her backyard, right, in that case, it's not the action of digging, it's modifying the subject. It's telling you what Annie is doing. And then they also get into this idea of gerunds. A gerund is when you would have an ing verb that serves as a noun, which means it's a thing. So hike, for instance, to hike is a verb. If you add an ing to that, it can then become a thing, hiking as an activity, or swimming as activities. And then the same or similar concept with this idea of participles. When you have an ed, en, or ing form of a verb, the first sentence here is mixed. That's the action of mixing, but chopped, another ed form, in this case, is not describing an action. It's not the past tense of chop. Which is what the ed does, right? It makes the verb into a past tense. So it's not the past tense form of chopped, rather it's modifying, describing the nuts in this case. or in the next sentence, the ing form, shimmering. It's not a thing, so it's not a gerund. It's not the action of shimmering. It's describing or modifying a noun. So it's functioning in that case, like the previous one, functioning as an adjective. And then they give you the other one, which I think is probably the most complicated concept, is with the verbs and the infinitives. Infinitive is the natural form of the verb. So normally when you see a to in front of a verb, you think automatically it's denoting an action. But as you can see in this first sample sentence, she decided to water. So it's what she decided. It's really functioning as an object. Or to build a car, in this case, in the second sentence, is really the subject, part of the subject of the sentence. So when you see that to, there's I think there is an automatic inclination to want to just say that's a verb, but you have to really look closely. Is it describing the action of watering or building, or is it modifying another part of that sentence? Right. So for some samples of that, we have Symbol smiled at the adorable sleeping dog on his front porch. All you're being asked to identify is whether it's a verb or not a verb. So in this case, sleeping is describing the dog. It's not describing the action, so it's not a verb. President Snow found a jar. Okay, that's an action, right? The act of finding. And notice there's no ending added to the verb here, right? So when you don't see an ending added to the verb, it's usually going to be a verb, unless it's an infinitive form, in which case you have to look carefully and see whether it's being used in that sense. For instance, Primrose Everdeen decided to buy a red umbrella. So in this case, this is what he or she, I guess, right? What she decided to do. So in that case, it is not a verb. Decided is the verb in that sentence. Timon dreams of riding the tallest water slide in the world. Again, this looks, you want to say it's a verb here because it's talking about riding something, but it's what he dreams of doing, right? So it's not the action of the sentence is not the riding, but the dreaming. So in that sense, it's not a verb. Rafiki enjoys walking his pet squirrel, so it's what he enjoys. So therefore, it is following the verb, not a verb. And here's one I wanted to see in an infinitive form. Hermione Granger spent all summer training her pet bulldog to ride a skateboard. So this is what she spent her summer doing. So again, subject here, verb here, right? And then this is what she did, what she spent it doing, right? So in that case, it is not a verb. That's an infinitive form. Okay, so that does it for that one, I think. If you moving on to the next one, identifying verbals as subjects, if you look at the lesson here, basically what you're looking at is obviously the subject's the part of the sentence that is doing the action, so it goes with the verb. An alarm went off. For instance, the alarm is the subject of the sentence. It's the doer of action. It's what went off. Where it went off is an object of the verb, as you can see here, right? So you have to look carefully. It talks about also, though, subjects in the middle of a sentence. Usually when you have a introductory clause, like after the award show, prepositional phrase such as that, or oftentimes when it gets confusing is with questions. Why is it spotted? That it is actually the subject because it goes with spotted. I'm sorry, it goes with his, is the verb, the action, or linking verb there. And that's why that can be confusing. And then when you identify subjects that aren't nouns or pronouns, when you have a phrase such as what Amanda said, right? So what she said inspired, or how my costume will look, right, is a mystery. So that's the subject of the sentence in those cases. And they give you some other examples here, like a participle phrase becoming an astronaut requires a lot of hard work. So becoming an astronaut, the action of doing that actually becomes a thing. So let's look at some of these samples then, sample sentences. It's basically asking you just to select the subject of the sentence. So if you look at what plays, plays is the verb. I think that's usually the easiest way to identify a subject is to identify the verb. So what plays? Timmins Nightlight. And notice here it highlights the entire thing for you. So it's not like you're going to miss part of that based on the format of the exercise. Despite the weather, we took Minerva's advice and drove to the beach. So we have took and we have drove. Well, who took and who drove? That's we. That's the subject. So what we have here, I think, is the tricky one, is when you have these phrases such as this, because if you look at really what the sentence, the verb of the sentence here is does not. And the reason, the confusion, I think, comes when you see a word like proposed after Hermione Granger. And so you're automatically going to think, oh, that's the verb, proposed. And but what Hermione Granger proposed all links together, right? Because that's what doesn't seem possible right now. So you have to be able to look past the idea of just seeing that verb after a noun and thinking that's automatically the verb in the sentence. Because really, and look at what the sentence is saying, because really what the sentence is saying here is that it doesn't seem possible right now. What doesn't seem possible right now? What Hermione Granger proposed doesn't seem possible right now. So I think those are a little tricky. And again, especially if that's something that's going to just pop up randomly because the questions are scrambled and not just as part of a particular lesson, I think it's easy to get confused with that. Playing soccer is Sirius Black's favorite form of exercise. So playing soccer, right, would be what his favorite form of exercise is. So that's the correct answer. And then daffodils are the most popular flower in Ron Weasley's neighborhood, right? So it would be what are the most popular, right? And that would be daffodils. Let's look at this one. This one is one where you have cooking dinner, right? A participle phrase as a subject, right? Was his favorite part of the day. What was cooking dinner? So those two things will go together as the complete subject. You know, if you're looking to have a quick way of identifying the subject, find the verb and then ask what or who, right? So what is Mr. Filch's plan for the summer? It is to travel to Thailand. So in that case, that would be the complete subject of the sentence. All right. I'll just do this one too, since this was a longer one. These are trickier. What excited the other scientists in the room? Right? It's what Peter Pettigrew concluded from his study. Okay, and so let's go to the next one. I'm trying to go back here. Here we go. Which would be identifying direct objects. So the lesson here is just basically receiving the action of the verb. So when we talk about the subject of a sentence, we say who or what is doing the action. With a direct object, we're saying who or what is receiving the action. So what did Karen find? She found a clue. That's the direct object. Who found it is the subject, right? But what was found would be the direct object. So looking at these as far as the practice sentences, oh look, there's me. Matthew Blair built a spaceship for his grandpa. All you're identifying here is the direct object, so what was built, and that would be a spaceship. The Hermione Granger shined her cheese grater, and I washed my lucky blender. So you have to look carefully. It may be multiple direct objects. So we have something that was shined, that's the cheese grater, and we have something that was washed, and that's my lucky blender. So in that case, you have two, which is possible. At the farm, I washed Ginny Weasley's, I like using washed, Ginny Weasley's pig and fed her goat. So what was washed? Again, we have two verbs here. And what was fed? Make sure I get that one. And that would be for that one. What was opened? The letter. Glitter spilled everywhere. That's not going to have an object. Okay, so this is a good one. Just to end with here, for this category, what was read, old clues, and what was bought, a magnifying glass. So be on the lookout for these multiple kinds of verbs, sentences with multiple verbs, and therefore multiple objects. And that's that. Okay, so back to the next lesson is identifying modifiers. And so this one is, just really, they're just going to give you different forms of the same thing. So a modifier is any word, clause, or phrase that describes another word, clause, or phrase. And you most commonly think of a modifier as an adjective like green, in the case of green apple in this sample sentence. But also you could have these phrases or clauses that are modifiers as well. And so you can see these examples here where you have Marissa as the subject and this longer phrase that actually is modifying, describing her in some way. So let's just look at some of the examples here. All it's going to ask you to do is to highlight the word that modifies the word in bold. So if we're talking about the salmon in bold, what is the part here of the sentence that's going to modify or describe the salmon? It's swimming in the stream. Donuts, they were covered in powdered sugar. That's what describes or modifies the donuts. Vincent Crabbe missed my magic trick because he was watching the squirrels. And what were the squirrels doing? They were crawling across the trampoline. So I think this is pretty easy overall. I don't think there's really anything tricky about this. The letter was written in code. So I don't think people are probably going to have an issue with that. This last one I think is the most challenging, which is identifying the function of the verbal. And so they're going to show you verbals as subjects, right? Like cooking pancakes. We looked at that earlier. This just kind of incorporates some of the earlier concepts and has you really be more specific in labeling how those verbals are working. So in this case, cooking pancakes is a subject. In this case, it could be an object. Like we talked about direct objects. What's he want to do? He wants to play soccer next Sunday morning, so it's functioning as an object. And then as a modifier, which we just covered, so kicking with all his strength, in this case, is describing, right? James, the person who is the subject of the sentence. Excited in the second sentence is modifying or describing Anna's cousin. So yeah, it's functioning basically as an adjective. Okay, so looking at some of the samples here, sample sentences that is. The way they give it to you, I think, makes it a little confusing in that I always want to see subject first, and they put subject at the bottom there by itself. So I think it's always going to be like in this order: modifier, object, subject. So be careful when you're clicking. There's a tendency to want to just say click on the first one for the subject, but subject is not the first one. So Oliver's best friend learned to swim by imitating the motions of her pet turtle. So in this case, we have learned is the verb, right? Again, I think it's crucial to identify the verb in the sentence first. Who learned is Oliver Wood's best friend, and what they learned was to swim. And so in that case, if it's answering the question, who or what learned, or I'm sorry, who or what was learned, who or what was learned, we have this as an object, to swim. Cooking is a skill Sarabi first learned in Brazil. So this is a linking verb, right? We don't have an action verb. We have a linking verb, is, are, was, were. In this case, cooking is a gerund. It's functioning as a noun. It's the subject of the sentence. Lord Voldemort plans on running for president. This is what he plans on doing. Plans is the verb. So in that case, it is the object. This is what she often imagines. So again, that's receiving the action of the verb, imagines. So therefore, it's an object. Not getting a lot of modifiers here. Learning how to sail, right? Cured. So the verb here is cured. And so learning how to sail is going to be the subject of the sentence. It's what cured whom of his fear. Here we go. So we have overcome with joy, right, as a introductory phrase, clause, and it's describing the subject, right? In this case, this is the modifier. This is what they built. They built a nest, right? So Cinna is the subject, built is the verb, a nest is an object, and then discarded tree branches, right? So that's going to be describing the tree branches, modifying the tree branches, right? No matter what he tries, he can't stop his dog from snoring. So can't stop being the verb here. What can't he stop? His dog from snoring. So it would be the object. Walking gracefully across the high wire, Gilderoy Lockhart heard the crowd cheering beneath him. So this entire phrase is describing, modifying the subject. So it's a modifier. And that's it. So hopefully everyone's good with that review. If you have any specific questions about any of the categories, issues with any of the concepts, just please let me know. Feel free to email me or reach out to me through Microsoft Teams. Like I said, the quiz will be Friday during the time that your class would meet. So make sure you check your schedule. I'll have it open for that hour period, and you need to take it during that time. If there's some kind of conflict that you have, please let me know in advance and I can try to make alternative arrangements. So look for a reading schedule posted on Veracross for our next book, which is Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse 5. And I'll start having you do some assignments starting next week for that. But the reading schedule will be posted in full by the end of this week, so you should see that. If you don't have the book, you need to get it. There's probably something available online, which I'll link to and check and see and link to if so. So okay, great. Talk to you guys later. Make sure you stay for the quiz. And like I said, reach out to me. Let me know if you have any questions or problems. All right. Take care. Bye.